Clara had always believed that teaching was more than just a job. It was her calling. Every morning she walked to the small private school at the corner of the city. Her shoes were worn, her clothes simple, but her heart full of hope. She didn't have much. Her monthly salary barely covered rent, and sometimes she skipped lunch so her students could have extra supplies. Yet whenever she stood before her class, everything else disappeared. Her passion made her forget how little she had. But that morning, something felt different. The school had a special guest, a powerful businessman named Mr. Grant. His company was considering sponsoring the school, and suddenly everyone acted as if royalty had arrived. When Clara entered the teacher's lounge, the other teachers whispered nervously. "That's him, the millionaire CEO," one of them muttered. "Be careful, he doesn't like people who don't look professional." Clara smiled politely, trying to hide her nervousness. She had heard of Mr. Grant, rich, respected, and ruthless in business. He was the kind of man who measured a person's worth by the brand of their shoes. Later that day, as Clara finished her math class, the principal called her into the office. Inside sat Mr. Grant. Arms crossed, suit flawless, expression cold. "You're Miss Clara, right?" he asked, glancing at her old handbag and worn-out shoes. "Yes, sir," she replied softly. "I've been teaching here for 6 years." Mr. Grant chuckled lightly, the kind of laugh that carried judgment. 6 years? And still here? No promotion? No better job? Don't you think that says something? Clara froze. She could feel every eye on the room. The principal shifted awkwardly, but said nothing. "Education is my passion," Clara managed to say. "Not everyone measures success with money." Mr. Grant raised an eyebrow. "Spoken like someone who's never had any." The room went silent. His words cut through her like glass. Clara forced a smile, blinked back tears, and whispered, "Maybe, but I've never lacked purpose." Mr. Grant stood up, unimpressed. "Purpose doesn't pay bills, Miss Clara. I'd rather my son learn from people who've actually achieved something." And with that, he walked out, leaving Clara standing there, humiliated, trembling, dismissed as if she were invisible. That night in her tiny apartment, Clara sat grading papers by candlelight. She replayed his words over and over in her mind. Purpose doesn't pay bills. Maybe he was right. Maybe people like her were born to struggle. But deep down, something inside her refused to give up. She didn't know it yet, but life was about to bring her face to face with that same arrogant man again, in a way that would change both their lives forever. The days after the humiliation were the hardest Clara had ever faced. She tried to keep teaching, pretending nothing had happened, but whispers followed her everywhere. "That's the teacher the millionaire insulted," someone murmured in the hallway. "Maybe he was right," another added. Each word felt like a knife. Her confidence, the one thing she had left, began to crumble. A week later, the principal called her into the office. He couldn't even look her in the eye. "Clara, the board has decided to let you go. We appreciate your dedication, but the new sponsors want a different image." She nodded quietly, forcing a smile even as her throat burned. Then she packed her few belongings into a worn-out bag and walked out of the school without saying goodbye. Outside, the wind was cold. Her shoes clicked against the pavement as she whispered to herself, "It's okay. I'll start over. I always do." But that night, reality hit her like a wave. The bills were piling up, her rent was late, and she had barely enough food for the week. Still, she refused to give up. She wrote a small note and pinned it to the town's notice board. "Private tutoring available, affordable rates, patient and kind teacher." Days passed. No calls, until one evening her old phone finally buzzed. "Hello? Is this Miss Clara?" a soft female voice asked. "Yes, it is. My son needs help. He's been struggling in school and we're desperate. Could you start tomorrow?" Clara smiled for the first time in days. "Of course. What's his name?" Ethan, the woman said. Ethan Grant. The name froze her heart. Grant. The same last name. It couldn't be. But fate had other plans. The next afternoon, Clara arrived at a luxurious mansion on the outskirts of the city. Marble floors, glass walls, a fountain taller than her apartment building. It felt like stepping into another world. The door opened, and a young boy stood there. Maybe 10 years old. His eyes were tired, his uniform wrinkled, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're the new tutor?" he asked. "Yes," she said warmly. "You must be Ethan." "You don't have to waste your time," he muttered. "I always fail anyway." Clara knelt down so their eyes met. "Then it's a good thing I don't believe in failure," she said softly. "We'll take it one step at a time." As she followed him inside, she noticed the emptiness in that enormous house. No laughter, no warmth, just silence and expensive furniture. And in that moment, she realized something. Ethan wasn't just a spoiled rich kid. He was a lonely child, craving the one thing money could never buy. For the first time since she lost her job, Clara felt something spark inside her again. Purpose. She didn't know that the same man who broke her spirit was Ethan's father, and soon destiny would bring that truth crashing down in the most unexpected way. At first, Ethan barely spoke during lessons. He slouched in his chair, sighed loudly, and rolled his eyes whenever Clara asked a question. He'd rather stare out the window than look at his books. But Clara never raised her voice. She had seen this before. Children who wore anger like armor because no one had taken the time to understand them. Instead, she smiled gently. "It's okay if you don't get it today," she said softly. "We'll try again tomorrow." Every day she came back, patient, calm, and kind. On the third day, Ethan finally looked up from his notebook. "Why do you even try?" he asked bluntly. "Most teachers give up on me." Clara set her pen down and smiled. "Because giving up on someone is like erasing a story before it's finished. And I think your story is just getting started." Ethan's expression softened. It was the first time anyone had said something like that to him. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the cold silence between them began to melt. Ethan started laughing at her small jokes. He began doing his homework without being asked. He even started greeting her with a shy smile when she arrived. One afternoon, as they took a short break from studying, Clara asked him about his favorite subject. Ethan hesitated. "I used to like art," he said quietly. "But my dad says it's a waste of time." "Why would he say that?" Clara asked gently. "He says people who draw can't be successful. That I need to focus on real things, like business." Clara smiled softly. "Well, maybe success isn't about how much money you make, it's about how many hearts you touch." Ethan looked at her confused. "You really believe that?" "She has to," she said with a small laugh. "Otherwise, the world would be too cold." For the first time, Ethan smiled back, a real smile. From that day on, everything changed. He began sketching again. He asked questions. He wanted to learn. Clara became more than a tutor. She became his safe place. One evening, as Clara was leaving, she heard voices echoing from inside the mansion. Mr. Grant's voice, loud and angry. "Ethan, your grades are still low. I spend money on tutors for nothing." "Dad, I'm trying. Miss Clara says." "Miss Clara?" Mr. Grant's voice dripped with disdain. "That woman again. Don't tell me she's filling your head with her nonsense." Clara froze outside the door, her heart pounding. She hadn't realized he still remembered her. "You're wasting your time with people like her, Ethan," he said coldly. "She's a failure, and failure is contagious." Clara quietly turned away, her eyes welling with tears. But as she walked down the path away from the mansion, she made herself a silent promise. I don't care what he thinks of me. I'll help his son become the kind of man he'll one day wish he could be. And from that night forward, she gave Ethan her all, not just lessons in math or science, but lessons in courage, kindness, and believing in himself. Because sometimes the greatest victories are born in the quiet moments no one sees.
The weeks that followed were full of quiet progress. Ethan was finally improving, smiling more, studying harder, and even showing Clara the drawings he had been hiding for years. She felt proud watching him grow, but she also worried. She could see the pain behind his smile, the constant need to prove himself to a father who never seemed to notice. One Friday evening, Ethan was unusually quiet. He kept glancing at his phone during their lesson. "Ethan, are you okay?" Clara asked softly. "It's nothing," he muttered. "Dad promised he'd come to my art show today, but his secretary just called. He's too busy." Clara felt her heart tighten. She smiled gently and said, "You know, sometimes people don't realize how much they matter until it's too late. Don't stop painting just because he doesn't show up." Ethan looked up, his eyes glassy. "You'll come, right?"
"Of course," Clara said. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." That night, after the small art event ended, the rain began to pour. Clara offered to drive Ethan home since his father's car never came. The roads were slippery. The sky was dark. But inside the car, Ethan laughed, showing her the little ribbon he'd won from the show. "Miss Clara, I think I'm going to be an artist one day." "I know you will," she said with a smile, "and a great one, too."
Suddenly, headlights. A truck skidded across the intersection. Tires screamed. Clara turned the wheel hard. Crash! The world went white. When the sound faded, rain pattered softly against twisted metal. Clara's head was bleeding. Her arm was trapped. She could barely move. Ethan was crying beside her, shaking her shoulder. Miss Clara, wake up!" "Shh," she whispered weakly. "It's okay, Ethan. You're safe. Just stay still. Help is coming." She could hear sirens in the distance, but her vision was fading. Through the blur, she reached for Ethan's trembling hand. "You're going to be okay. Promise me you'll never stop believing in yourself." "Don't say that! You'll be fine! Please!" he sobbed. Her lips curved into a faint smile.
"Tell your dad. Tell him that success isn't measured by money. It's measured by love." Then everything went dark. When Mr. Grant arrived at the hospital, his world shattered. Ethan was safe, just a few bruises. But Clara? Clara was in critical condition. He stood outside her room, staring through the glass at the woman he had once humiliated, the woman who had just risked her life to save his son. For the first time in years, the powerful billionaire couldn't speak. He couldn't command. He couldn't control. He couldn't buy his way out of the truth staring back at him. He whispered to himself, his voice breaking, "What have I done?" He stayed there all night, sitting silently by her bedside, watching the monitors beep. Each sound was a reminder of how wrong he had been. And as dawn broke, the man who once mocked a teacher for being poor now prayed to trade all his wealth for her life. Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital window. Machines beeped steadily beside Clara's bed. She was alive, weak, but alive. When she slowly opened her eyes, the first thing she saw wasn't the ceiling. It was Ethan asleep in a chair beside her, his small hand still clutching hers. And just beyond him stood Mr. Grant. He looked nothing like the proud, polished man she remembered. His eyes were swollen, his clothes wrinkled, his face pale with guilt. When he realized she was awake, he took a hesitant step forward. "Miss Clara, His voice
cracked. He took a deep breath, lowering his head. I owe you everything. You saved my son's life. After all the things I said to you, you still risked yours for him. Clara tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Any teacher would have done the same, she whispered. Mr. Grant shook his head. No, they wouldn't. I've spent my whole life believing people like you were beneath me, but when it mattered most, you showed me what true worth looks like.
He reached into his pocket and placed a folded envelope on her bedside table. This isn't payment, he said softly. It's an offer. I've started an education foundation to help underprivileged kids get better schooling. I want you to run it. Clara's eyes widened. Me? You, he said firmly. You've taught me something money never could, that character is worth more than wealth. Tears filled her eyes. For years she had struggled to survive, to prove herself, and now the very man who had once torn her down was giving her the chance to lift others up. Ethan stirred awake and smiled through his bandages. Miss Clara, Dad said you're going to be the boss now. Clara chuckled softly. No, Ethan, I'll always just be your teacher.
Months later, the Clara Hope Foundation opened its doors, a place where children from poor families could learn without limits. Every morning, Clara stood at the gate, greeting them with the same warmth she once gave to Ethan. As for Mr. Grant, he visited often, no longer in a suit, no longer hiding behind pride. Sometimes he even stayed to help teach. One afternoon, as they watched the children playing, he turned to her and said, "You were right, you know." "About what?" she asked. "Purpose doesn't pay bills," he said with a smile, "but it builds something far more valuable. Hearts." Clara laughed softly, the sound full of peace. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel poor. She felt rich. Rich in love, rich in purpose, rich in gratitude. Because true success isn't about what you have, it's about what you give.